Hi everyone, I'm delighted to welcome you to our Metabolic Support UK annual conference and our first ever one virtually. Last year, when I took over the role of chair, I could not have imagined that our world would be so different today. I am extremely proud that the team has adjusted and responded so well to the challenges in order to continue to serve and support our metabolic communities during this pandemic. On behalf of the Board of Trustees, thank you. This year, we also welcomed 3 new other members to the board, Barry Hopkins as Treasurer and Carl Lander and Christina Gibbs as Patient Representative. We look forward to including them in the board and to their valuable input and contribution. Unfortunately, however, we also said goodbye to a few colleagues. The economic impact and uncertainty caused by COVID drove us to make the hard decision to reduce our team and say goodbye to Rachel, Julie, and Andrea. We thank them dearly for all their contributions over the years. We were also very sad to say goodbye to our wonderful CEO, Lindsay Weaver, due to ill health. Lindsay has worked immensely hard for the last 5.5 years to evolve and navigate MS UK through rapidly changing and at times incredibly challenging circumstances. Lindsay has been instrumental in bringing forward an ambitious new strategy, which I'll go into shortly. While we wish Lindsay well and hope that she returns to good health quickly, I want to convey my sincere thanks to her on behalf of all of us for all that you have done for the community. You will be greatly missed by us all, Lindsay. As our world seems consumed by the negativity of COVID, it's hard to remain positive, but I want to focus today on the positive changes that we are introducing. As COVID emerged, we were about to announce the launch of our new strategy to steer our course for 2030. COVID delayed the announcement and our immediate response changed. However, our commitment to the new strategy remained, and if anything, emerged even more strongly as we responded to the new world thrown at us. Our 2030 strategy has 4 main pillars which will underpin our work. It has a focused drive to meet priority needs, develop collaborative, evidence-based empowerment and advocacy programs, and to ensure a maximum impact for individual patients, caregivers, collective patient communities, and the wider stakeholders in the IMD community. There are 4 pillars to this new strategy of ours: individual support, creating communities, personal empowerment of patients and families, and advocacy on behalf of the wider community. Providing individual support will always be a cornerstone of our work. Our virtual doors will always be open and welcoming those that need practical help, advice, and emotional support. We will always serve to signpost to other services and organisations that are best placed to help each time if we are not able to do so ourselves. But as important as individual support is, it is sadly not enough to sustain the ever-changing needs of our community. With around 400 different inherited metabolic diseases, we need to find a scalable way to support each and every one and their individual needs. That against the backdrop of COVID, Brexit, and economic uncertainties. Some diseases already have their own well-established national and international advocacy groups, and our roles in those instances is to signpost and to collaborate, to share learnings and to unite in our voice for wider communities. There are other diseases, however, that have nothing, and it's our duty for those diseases to establish a specific support community. And this is our second pillar, which is creating communities. Knowing where to start when there are so many different diseases can be overwhelming, however. But we will be establishing and nurturing these communities based on a specific criterion, which includes high unmet need, horizon scanning of emerging medicines, and being ultra rare, as is illustrated in the next slide. Over the coming years, we will identify 3 to 4 new diseases a year and support them to establish their own community by identifying new patients, enabling connections, and increasing our knowledge and understanding of living with the disease. If these communities grow and thrive into an entity of their own, we will enable and celebrate that, as we know that an individual sense of identity can be important. However, if that community wants to continue to be nested within the MSUK umbrella, we will also make sure that we provide the necessary ongoing support and resources needed, because in reality, one size does not fit all. Our third pillar is empowerment. At individual, family, or community level, our goal is to empower you to live your life. Our collective experience to date means that no individual, family, or community should face a new challenge alone without the support, advice, or insight of someone that's already experienced or endured the same. Our experience and insight to date is vast, and we do not want anyone wasting time, emotion, money, or energy reinventing the wheel. It is our duty to create tools, platforms, and resources to support others in a scalable yet personal way. Through applying this approach and offering well-tested support tools, our knowledge base and understanding of the broader issues and needs evolve, which in turn inform us with insightful data. Accumulating these experiences and collating them will enable us to be better informed to advocate further on your behalf. Which leads me to our fourth pillar, advocacy. Strong advocacy in today's confusing world is fundamental. By partnering and collaborating with other advocacy groups, healthcare professionals, and organizations, we will become your collective voice and utilize our experience to advocate across all inherited metabolic diseases. We understand that a cure is what we wish for in every disease. And while there have been significant medical advances happening every single day, the reality of a cure will not be available overnight, which is why we also need the wider advocacy as seen in the next slide. As such, we must advocate to access early diagnosis, specialist care, local social support, inclusive educational opportunities, equitable access to treatment when available, and much, much more. Our remit is vast and may seem overwhelming, but I am confident that we will make great strides in delivering our new strategy, because despite of COVID, and indeed because of COVID, we have already made great progress. We will strive for excellence, financial sustainability, and transparency in all that we do, starting today with our conference. Patient participation, creating patient leaders. I'm sure that you'll agree that the conference agenda champions individual support, empowerment, and advocacy. And I look forward now to handing over to the rest of the speakers in this morning's sessions. Thank you.
I'm Nick Sireau, and I am the chair and CEO of a patient group called the AKU Society. We work on an ultra-rare disease called alkaptonuria, or AKU. For short, it's also known as black bone disease. Both my children have got this illness, and for the past 17 years, we have been working on developing a treatment for this disease. So what I'm going to talk about over the next 15 minutes of this webinar is really what we have done to develop this drug and what you can learn for your patient groups about our experience to see if you can then take this forward for yourselves. So AKU was actually the first disease to be shown to be inherited in 1902 by Sir Archibald Garrod, who is this person that you can see here. Now, Archibald Garrod managed to show that some diseases could be passed on using Mendel's theory of genetic inheritance. And this was absolutely revolutionary at the time. And that is why we often say that AKU was the first disease to be shown to have genetic origins. Our claim to fame is really this oldest AKU patient from about 1500 BC. This is an Egyptian mummy, and the blackness that you can see on the mummy is characteristic of the ochronosis, which I'll explain. It causes the damage in AKU. So our first step was really about how to understand the disease. When my sons were first diagnosed 19 years ago, even though the disease had been known for more than 100 years, there was still no treatment for this disease. So what we did as a patient group when we set ourselves up in 2003 is that we started off by raising small sums of money, first of all £5,000 when I ran a half marathon, which we then put into an autopsy of a patient. And then from there, we slowly built our understanding of the disease. So this is the AKU tetrad. This is basically the 4 diagnostic symptoms of AKU. In the top left, you can see the black urine, which is characteristic of the disease, which is how my children got diagnosed. Top right, the blue kind of tint in the ear cartilage. Bottom left, you have the black spots in the eyes, again due to the ochronosis. And then bottom right, this is an elbow joint from the post-mortem that we carried out 15 years ago. And as you can see, it is completely black, hence the name black bone disease. Here is the spine of someone with AKU, and you can see the intervertebral disc where the arrows are, and you can see that there it has completely collapsed, okay? And that is one of the first clinical symptoms of the disease when the spine starts to collapse in people's 20s and 30s. Here is an animal model of the disease, so you can guess which one has AKU. It's obviously the one to the right because its litter is black from its black urine. And this was very useful for us. In 2007, when we were starting to pick up some steam, we raised around £500,000 from the big lottery funds research program to develop this animal model. And it took us 3 years and was very successful and allowed us to test new treatments for this illness. Just a tiny little bit of metabolic science. This is the metabolic pathway of AKU. It is the breakdown of an amino acid called tyrosine into phenylalanine, and then further down the pathway. And at each part, you can see at each kind of step, there is a rare genetic disease like phenylketonuria or PKU at the top, albinism. At the bottom, you have tyrosinemia type 1. And then alkaptonuria, which is due to a deficiency in the enzyme homogentisate 1,2-dioxygenase, which then leads to the accumulation of an acid called homogentisic acid, which is those words in the red box, which accumulate at 2,000 times the normal rate and attach to cartilage and bone and pigment in this process called ochronosis. And the drug we have been developing is where that arrow is. It's a drug called nitisinone, and it basically is an enzyme inhibitor at the level of 4-hydroxy-phenylpyruvic acid dioxygenase. So it's an enzyme inhibitor. So for AKU, it stops the accumulation of this homogentisic acid. But it was originally developed 30 years ago for the disease tyrosinemia type 1, right at the bottom, which is again ultra rare and which kills children by age 2 from liver cancer. And it has worked exceptionally well for that disease. And the children who were first treated with nitisinone with tyrosinemia type 1 30 years ago are still alive and thriving. So in the late 90s, some scientists at the National Institutes of Health in the US started to think, well, maybe nitisinone could work for AKU. The problem is AKU takes decades to develop. People, apart from the black urine at birth, people start to develop their clinical symptoms in their 20s and 30s, sometimes a bit later. And then it evolves over the years, you know, with joint deterioration, spinal problems, heart problems, the eyes, the ears, and different parts of the body. And that is quite difficult to study a disease over such a length of time. And that's why when the group at the National Institutes of Health in the US tried to do a clinical trial 15 years ago, that trial failed because they didn't have enough patients. The trial didn't last long enough, and it only looked at one clinical symptom, which was hip rotation. This is the urine of a patient with AKU. You can see BL on the left, that's baseline, and it's a urine that has been treated from a patient who's been treated with nitisinone. And you can see the urine completely clear. So biochemically, it works exceptionally well. So our second step was about setting up a centre of excellence and then clinical trials. And this really took off in 2010 after 7 years of very hard work, where we also funded for £60,000 a natural history study that helped us understand the disease better. And here you can see the arc of academic research that we did. We have always worked very closely with the Royal Liverpool University Hospital and the University of Liverpool, where our professors are based, particularly Professor Ranganath, who runs the National AKU Centre, who was the founder and is now back as an interim director, and who is the world leading specialist on AKU. And then Professor Jim Gallagher, who runs all the basic science at the University of Liverpool. And I think part of the success of our group has been the very close collaboration with these excellent scientists between them and us as a patient group. So you can see 2005, post-mortem of a patient. 2009, we raised £30,000 from the Foyle Foundation to do a cell model PhD. 2010, we finished a natural history study. 2011, we finished the AKU mouse model. And in 2012, we launched the National Centre, where all patients in England and Scotland can have access to the drug nitisinone in an off-label manner. And over the past 8 years, we have been studying their reactions to this drug. And here you see the results. The AKU SSI is the AKU Severity Score Index, and it is our way of measuring the progress of the disease over time. It is a much more effective way of measuring the progress of the disease than what happened at the trial at the NIH 15 years ago in the US, where they only looked at hip rotation. Here with the AKU Severity Score Index, we look at the eyes, the ears, the spine, all the joints, the heart, all the different parts of the body. Now, what you see there, the black dotted line shows how the disease should have evolved if patients were not given nitisinone. And the brown dotted line is what actually happened. So the red thing is from our natural history study where people did not have nitisinone. And then there's base, year 0, year 1, all the way to year 5, people at the National Centre with nitisinone. And you can see the nitisinone more or less stopped the evolution of the disease in these patients in a statistically significant way, which is absolutely fantastic. So the conclusions from this study at the National AKU Centre is that the use of unlicensed nitisinone is well tolerated and safe. Data suggests the ochronosis, that is the black pigment, is slowed, and actually we even saw that it was partially reversed, which was amazing. Experience suggests clinical outcomes, that's the AKU Severity Score Index, are slower in terms of progression, which is good. And data suggests that male and females respond similarly to nitisinone, and aortic stenosis, which is the problems of the heart caused by AKU, appear to progress more slowly. At the same time, in 2011-2012, we set up a consortium across Europe to do some clinical trials of nitisinone for AKU. And out of 540 applicants to the European Commission's Framework Protocol 7 call for rare disease clinical trials, we came first with a score of 15 out of 15. And the reason for that is we worked incredibly hard on the application, on putting together a consortium, on making sure it was very focused on what we wanted to achieve. And so these studies started in 2012, and we have 3 studies. SONIA 1, the suitability of nitisinone in alkaptonuria 1, which was a phase 2 study to find the right dose in the UK and Slovakia. SONIA 2, suitability of nitisinone in alkaptonuria 2, which was a phase 3 4-year study in UK, Slovakia and France. And SOPHIA, subclinical ochronosis features in alkaptonuria, which was a cross-sectional study in the UK where we did not give the drug to patients, but we looked at what age the damage actually started. These are all the members of the consortium. So you can see there's 3 clinical trial centres in the top left. There is the pharma company, Sobi, who came on board, and they provided the drug for free and provided also assistance with the clinical trial, even though the majority was funded by the European Commission. The different universities and the two patient groups, the AKU Society and ALCAP in France. And this was from the launch in November 2012, all the different members of the consortium in Slovakia, where there are much more patients than anywhere else. This was the phase 2 study where we tested 0 milligrams, 1 milligrams, 2, 4, and 8 milligrams in groups of 8 patients. And as you can see, the results of reduction in the homogentic acid are pretty amazing. At 8 milligrams, we had a reduction of 99.4% of homogentic acid. We had been to the European Medicines Agency, and they have told us in their scientific advice, they wanted homogentic acid near normal levels. This is not quite normal levels, but it's the closest we've ever been. Sonia 2 was aiming to have 70 patients on the drug and 70 patients off the drug in a randomized control trial. In the end, we managed to recruit 138 to these 3 clinical trial centres in Liverpool, Slovakia, and France, which was incredibly successful, and we were really pleased with how we did that. And Sophia, the final one, where we were looking at what age the damage starts, we had groups by age, 16 to 20 years, all the way to 50 years plus, 2 males, 2 females in each group. And we found that even at 16 years of age, the damage was starting. And that's why we have to start treatment at least at 16. We're now doing a pediatric study to see if we have to start earlier. Statistical significance was reached a year ago when Professor Ranganathan and the statisticians and the company Sobi looked at the data. It was significant. And that's why Sobi, who owned the drug, then submitted in February of this year a claim for marketing authorization with the European Medicines Agency. And we hope to hear by the end of this year if that's been successful. This is what patients said. These trials have given us great hope. This treatment could completely change our lives with that one step closer to a cure. And the patients we've met who are on the trial said it really did change things for them. So we're really positive about this. Still cautious, you never know when things go to the regulatory agencies, but still very positive. Patient recruitment and retention. As the patient group, we played a key role in this, and we recruited, our aim was 140 patients in 9 months. We managed 138, so we were very pleased. And then we worked a lot on patient retention, and this was all, we had a small team at the AKU Society which worked on making sure the patients were kept informed. Our person there, Kieran Scott, was constantly in touch with patients, telling them how the trial was going on, helping organize their travel and all those kinds of things. And that was very important for us as a patient group to make sure, because one of the key reasons why clinical trials fail is because patients drop out or are not recruited. Step 4 was working with patients around the world. So this is the number of patients we had at the time. We knew of 950 patients. We now know of more, but you can see there's some hotspots. We had also a number of patients from Jordan, 19 patients who participated in the trial. And we set up AKU societies with local patients around the world, as you can see in all these different countries, which was really important to try and move things forward. So what does this mean for you as patient groups? Well, in parallel, we were being constantly approached by people who wanted to set up patient groups for their rare disease where there wasn't one. And that's why we set up Find a Cure as a completely independent charity to provide training and to provide advice and to provide peer mentoring for people who want to set up their patient groups for their rare diseases. And please go to the Find a Cure website here, findacure.org.uk, to find out more. But the learnings really, I think, for you as patient groups and the challenges is, one, find a very good scientific and clinical team that you can work with, academics who are passionate about your disease, who will become passionate. In 2003, when we first started with Liverpool, we were just a small group working with them. It was not priority, and over time it became a huge priority for them. Secondly, look at potential drugs that can be repurposed. These are drugs used for other conditions that can be used for your disease. That's the second thing, because that can accelerate the process. Thirdly, try and network with the pharma industry. Go to conferences such as the World Orphan Drug Congress and try and meet companies or biotechs that might be interested in your disease. Fourthly, try to identify as many patients as possible who have your disease, who you can then recruit into clinical trials and help set up groups around the world. And fifthly, work very hard on the fundraising and look at trusts and foundations, but also community fundraising. And finally, do look to the bigger pots of funding, such as from the UK government, the NIHR, the MRC, but also, and this depends on how negotiations for Brexit go, with the European Union. Finally, if you want to find out more, Anthony Hall and myself put together a book called the Patient Group Handbook, a practical guide for research and development, which has chapters on all the different aspects of drug development for rare disease patient groups. Tony Hall is an expert in orphan drug development who was absolutely crucial to helping us succeed in what we do. And I would really recommend this. All the proceeds from this book will go to Find a Cure. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions, do email me, nick@akusociety.org. Thank you.
My name is Judy Kelly, and I'm a freelance consultant working in the rare inherited disorders arena. I've been working in this arena for a number of years in full-time employment at Genzyme and BioMarin, and it's been a really fabulous experience to connect with so many medical teams and patient organizations, and also regulators who are all sharing the same dream of trying to bring therapies and treatments for patients and families facing the many challenges of rare inherited disorders. I want to say a huge thanks, first of all, to Metabolic Support UK. I've known them since the early inception of the patient charity from RTMDC, and then Climb, and now, more recently, Metabolic Support. And I think they have been a huge lifeline for so many patients and families, and also, for industry too, because they are the interface between regulators, industry, the medical teams, everyone really, and they are the ones who are regularly in contact when giving support to patients and families, which as an ex-nurse myself, I think is hugely vital. They've always made me feel extremely welcome and supported and informed. And they offer all their help with kindness and from their heart and love. And that's included my interaction with them too. So I'm immensely grateful for all they've done to help me down the years. When we think about all the work we do to try and help patients and families, it's important that they are the heart and center of everything we do. And as this slide indicates, there are many groups who surround the patient and families, from the medical teams, patient charities like Metabolic Support UK, myself in the biotech and pharmaceutical industry, and the regulators who are helping to try and navigate through with new developments and treatments. And we all work as a kind of synergistic group, all providing a kind of individual role, but working together, keeping the patient and families right at the very heart and center of everything we do. As you can probably imagine, there are very strict rules and guidance and restrictions when you're navigating through this world of research in rare disorders. And it's important that I think everyone is very mindful of that. The pharmaceutical and biotech industries are very tightly governed in terms of what they can and can't do along this journey of product development. And it's important that, as well as the science that goes along with developing these treatments, that they have the humility to try and understand what it feels like for the journey for these families, and not just be a kind of distant provider of a therapy, because it's not just the therapy itself that is important here. It's the whole life journey and how a potential therapy may fit in with that, understanding that things can change for families along the sort of clinical trial journey. The governing body which regulates what the industry can do and can't do is the ABPI. And some years ago, they developed a kind of guidance document for working with patient organizations. And that's been incredibly helpful because it's provided a structure so that industry knows where its limits are and what the possibilities are and keeps everyone safe. There are some very important elements here, I feel, in that for industry working in rare disorders, that the journey with patients and families is lifelong, as compared to some treatments where it may be intermittent and the patients receive their therapy and then hopefully they do well and then there's no further interaction. But for rare diseases, that's quite different. And so you have to think about things like children becoming teenagers, adapting for schooling, themselves going on to further education, university, and then eventually hopefully becoming parents themselves. And the importance that the therapy fits in with all of these developments and changes and allows the patient to lead as normal a life as possible. The therapy is fitting in around these many demands, but not becoming the primary focus, life becoming the primary focus and therapy fitting in around that. Working closely with the doctors and nurses who help to harmonise this care and going above and beyond where is really required. And taking advice from regulators, and rather than seeing them as a challenge to overcome, really seeing them as partners in this journey. I've attached here a little link for the APBI guidance, which is our Bible, shall we say, of what we can and can't do. And beyond that, the MHRA and NICE are the governing overarching body that these connections help provide forums for input from patient organisations and medical professionals. It's quite routine that as a company develops a therapy and goes to meet with these regulators, that they do allow a patient advocacy voice to attend so that you can provide a kind of 360-degree feedback on not just how their treatment will impact the patient, but how the patient will feel about this and how it fits in with their daily lives and how their lives have been to date prior to treatment. So this is a kind of joint effort, not just purely the industry meeting with these regulators to try and get a drug approved. It's critical for rare disorders that don't have any individual patient groups, and I have worked with many of those, that when a patient is diagnosed and doesn't know where to go for help, that they have somewhere to turn. And of course, the physician and the medical teams are, their primary contact at a time like this. But there are lots of other things and elements of life that a patient support group like Metabolic Support UK provides. Just the general living with life and all the aspects of trying to cope, how the disorder affects the rest of the family and the impact on that. Connecting other families together nationally and worldwide helps reduce that feeling of isolation and not feeling so alone. And although this meeting is being held via Zoom, Metabolic Support bring patients and families together annually. And I think that's an incredible opportunity for patients to share experiences, meet with each other. It's a huge comfort. Patient organisations often help fund research too and to develop treatments and supporting early diagnosis and the diagnostic centres that provide such a good service for rare inherited disorders. And they work very closely with medical professions and the teams to try and stay ahead of for these innovations and things like newborn screening and early access. raising awareness of these conditions amongst the medical health, social care and teaching professions, as well as the general public, providing easy to understand information to schools when children may have to have intervals and when they have to come out of school to have their treatments, or trying to have their treatment within that schooling environment. All of these things are crucially important in helping patients lead a normal life. For most families, and in fact for all of us really, the medical teams are the primary source for interactions. And this is where, as industry person, we first go to discuss with those experts what they feel about the research that the industry is conducting and the impact it may have on the disorder and the families themselves. These are our real experts. But for rare disorders, we know that there can be a challenge in trying to find a medical profession who has seen this disorder in the past, given that they're often very rare, and has some expertise. So this is quite often where metabolic support also will bring these physicians together and create working groups and environments where information is shared. There's often very little data available when a clinical trial starts. There may be some historic information about how patients have experienced their journey, and there may be some early science based on what we know right now about how the disease impacts the patient. But generally speaking, the data is usually very limited. And industry and patient organizations are often working together on creating disease education materials that medical teams may be able to share with their patients, a little bit about the impact of the disorder, where to go for help, and also so sort of an easy to understand information about the clinical trial. Medical teams can share these insights and information and amplify the patient's voices to industry to make sure that the work the industry is doing and helping to design clinical trials in the correct manner, and creating disease education materials around that specifically. The goal always, I think, is to try, for rare disorders, is to try and turn research into therapy. And it's important to provide joint support for those patients and families whose hope and desire and anticipation is for a positive outcome from this research. Not all early stage products in development, medical products in development actually reach a positive outcome. In fact, many for rare disorders don't often meet the final endpoint of becoming an approved product. There's a huge investment by biotechnology companies, and not all of them reach a kind of positive outcome. And it's important that while we're going through those stages of research and understanding, and particularly the early phase 1 and phase 2 aspects of the trial, that we become one voice, so the messaging is clear from industry, from patient support, from regulators, that we're trying our best to try and get to that ultimate endpoint where this therapy is going to make a difference. But at the beginning of the research, we're not sure what that will be at that time, and it takes time and it takes effort from all parties to get to that ultimate goal. The patient support groups provide 360-degree holistic care from every aspect. And the medical teams are doing their very best to help patient and families. The regulators help provide guidance, so we're all keeping on track and we know what we're supposed to be doing. And industry and their commitment to develop therapies which can safely be approved and available for those who need them. And amongst all of us, the harmonization of that messaging is crucial. I think for the patient and families who themselves may be worried and anxious, just knowing that all these important groups are talking to each other and sharing information and working together with this one focused goal with the patient and family in mind. Patients play a huge role in clinical trials, and that's not just purely from the aspect of testing the drug. There's many real life aspects of living with a rare disease that the patient and family experience that cannot be mirrored by purely historical data or just pure clinical trials. Impact on quality of life, impact on family life, ability to be able to go to work, all of these things are crucially important. And those insights which patients and families share as part of this adds greatly to the mass knowledge and awareness and can really change the landscape of medical research. Most biotechnology companies want to have that kind of early insight to make sure that their clinical trial design is meeting all needs and not just purely showing if this is an effective drug. And from start to completion of research, the patient and family plays such an important role in defining the why, the how, and the when. You probably hear a lot about patient registries, and for most biotechnology companies, as they're developing their treatments, this becomes a mandatory requirement by regulators. And it's important for patient and families to understand that that information which is being gathered through these patient registries is crucially important. Primarily because there's often very little known or published at the time of the start of the clinical trial. The breadth and depth of understanding may be limited by only a very small number of patients, a handful of patients who've had experience in living with a rare inherited disorder. Registries themselves can help to develop the knowledge and the data and provide a much greater understanding of the impact of living with a rare disorder. Drug development and regulators and medical teams all need this insight, as it helps so much more to provide a comprehensive understanding. And by involving a large number of patients from a global perspective, as well as from a national perspective, via these registries, a much greater knowledge is created and understood. And in this way, patients and families are very much partners in medical research and drug development, and makes them an important part of future understanding and potential further therapy development. So each of us, Metabolic Support UK, the Patient Support Group, ourselves as industry, the regulators, the medical teams, we're each trying to provide a signpost of where to go for help. And sharing that together is crucially important. It's very important to try and see things from the patient's perspective, and also from patient organisations' perspective and the medical teams. And if we see things from others' perspective, then we can have a greater understanding about what's important, a greater understanding about how to care for those sensitivities, and that we stay together as a focused team, doing our very best to try and help patient families, as we've said before, at the heart and centre of everything we do. Thank you very much, Metabolic Support, for this opportunity to share my thoughts and experiences, which for me have been a blessing.
Hello, I'm Carl Lander, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the patient perspective in patient involvement. And I come to you with a perspective of somebody who is a patient with pyruvate kinase deficiency, which is an inherited metabolic disorder which affects my red cells and means that I need to have lots of blood transfusions. Some people are born with no symptoms at all, other people like myself have lots of symptoms and need lifelong treatment. I'll be talking to you about the patient perspective, but also a little bit about carers' perspective from my point of view, because I do think they're quite different and there are some nuances that we could consider. So patient involvement for me is absolutely essential. If, for example, a company is considering a whole new therapy or medicine perhaps, then really people need to start talking to patients at a very early stage. The revolution may come from that therapy, but perhaps the way it is delivered or the things you have to go through to receive that therapy are as bad as the disease burden, or worse perhaps, And a patient would have to really consider whether or not it's worth going through, because at the end of the day, what do they gain? Now, when I say patients are important, I also think that carers are really important in this process. Carers aren't impartial. Carers obviously have huge emotions linked to what they're doing and what they're saying to people about the disease process they see in their loved one or their friend. But actually they have a very different view, and one that is essential to hear, because they're the people who care for you when you're not well, and they see what it does to you, and perhaps at times when the individual patient doesn't really understand what's going on and maybe has a very different view of it. So I think carers really have to be involved as well at all of these stages along the way. I would say in particular the views of parents are really important, and it's a thing that I have great desire that we make progress with in supporting new carers, but also get them to tell us their views, because they're the ones that are living the experience for the first time, and their views are absolutely raw and new and very much of benefit for people to hear. Another area where patient involvement is so important is actually about the development of knowledge and understanding of any particular disease within the medical community, and also with other clinicians such as nurses and physios, etc. Patients have a unique perspective to that, and probably the only perspective at times where that can really help people understand what it's like to live with this particular disease, such as mine, and help people understand why people feel the way they do and why they sometimes are so desperate for some treatment. I've been quite unwell for the last few months, and I've really struggled to make doctors understand actually the impact it's having upon me and why I really want to be treated and make things normal again so that I can get back to the life I had beforehand. There's always a real interest in the science of a disease, isn't there? And medics are really keen to understand that and to find ways to work on it and remedy it. But actually we also need to have people move towards the idea of it's also really important to know what the impact is, how it affects life, and actually how it affects life chances for individuals, be it with work, education, having social interaction with people, friendships, etc. It is genuinely an honour to represent patients and to be able to help give ideas and support to those who are developing new therapies or looking into the impacts of any particular disease, particularly for me obviously pyruvate kinase deficiency. However, as a representative, there are tensions, because I have my own experiences, my own opinion, my own views, which sometimes are very different to those of others. And you have to stop and think and work out actually what is best to be said as a representative. When people say things that you may not agree with, you have to sit back and ask yourself, why do they see it differently? What is their context? Is it because of their experiences? Or perhaps actually they're right and my experience and my understanding is really quite not there. Sometimes people have a very poor experience, say in medical care, and that can really make their views particularly different and very much focus on one issue. And I have found that with some people, and you have to take that into account, and you have to actually represent that view as well and make sure that their voice is heard. Because sometimes people get very emotional and they just don't want to actually have to have a conversation about it, and you have to draw those things out. I think actually in the end you have to find a middle ground about where people sit and make sure that you take those views along. But also, as I say, those unique experiences really must be told. You have to also put forward all sides equally and without favour. So if there are views about a particular healthcare situation, actually you need to just disregard those and make sure that you are very impartial in what you do. And I think that comes back to the key big thing about being honest. And if you don't have the knowledge or experience to talk about something, then you say so, and you say, look, I need to go and ask about this, I need to find out more about it and better understand what's happening with it. So when you're representing patients, you really have to make sure that you put all sides forward equally and make sure that everyone's views are represented, and make sure that no one particular perspective is given more importance than another, particularly not your own, and certainly don't ever exclude other people's views. I think as an advocate you must be honest. So sometimes you'll have a conversation about things of which you've got absolutely no knowledge or understanding. And I think you have to say so, and you have to say either I won't participate in the conversation, I'll listen in and give you some thoughts that might be useful, or even say, look, I'll go along and talk to other people about this and come back to you because it's not an area of my expertise. And actually, there are sometimes conversations that you have that particularly relate to one gender or another, and clearly some of those conversations I won't be able to say I've got any experience in, and definitely I need to seek the views of other people. I'm not aware that there's any code of conduct for advocates. However, I think the moral imperative is that you always seek to do no harm. I would say that advocacy when representing groups is actually very similar, and you need to make sure that your voice and that of others is heard. However, when working in these situations, very often you're not actually accountable for the outcomes of some of the things that you're talking about. And that makes it a little easier because you can put forward everyone's views and be quite forceful to make sure they're heard, but other people will make the decisions. Having recently worked with clinicians, I have found that they are really keen to engage with patients to better understand their life experiences and how their diseases affect them. This is a real difference to maybe 20, 30 years ago, and it's a piece of work and progress that I'm really keen to see. Being an advocate for a disease that you have yourself can be in a really emotional time, and it can bring back memories from things that have happened in your past that can be quite upsetting. However, I would say this gives you a stronger sense of purpose, and for me it really helps me want to more and more ensure that the future of PKD patient care is much improved and patients' experiences and their needs are taken into account to make significant changes for their way of life. You do need to be resilient and to feel comfortable in the group you're working, and these are really key foundations of being able to speak openly on behalf of yourself and others. As I've said before, as a patient representative you must be honest, and one of the things you have to be honest about is your own health and how you feel at any one time. If you're not well, you really can't represent others equally and fairly, and I think you have to then take time out, have a break and come back later on as a much better patient representative, because also you'll have had that experience of that episode which will bring a wider range of ideas and thoughts to the table. I hope you've realised from my talk that I love representing patients and I find it fascinating and meaningful, and I recommend it to all of you. I hope this has been informative and has encouraged you to consider becoming involved in whatever community or your IMD that you may have. And if you want further details of how you can get involved, please talk to Metabolic Support UK afterwards. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Helen and I am the Patient Communities Manager for Metabolic Support UK. I'm here today to tell you a little bit about our Patient Insight series. So our Patient Insight series started out as part of our coronavirus response. And if we reflect back to the beginning of this pandemic, we were very much stood on the edge of this maze, not knowing which direction to turn, not knowing what the path was going to look like, and not knowing how we were going to get out the other side. Our experience of this maze so far has highlighted some real key issues. First of all, the uncertainty, the not knowing, the anxiety of being faced with managing yours or your child's condition under completely new circumstances. People were asking things such as, how am I going to access medicines? What about the trial that I'm on? And how on earth do you expect me to see my consultant when the last place on earth I want to be right now is at hospital? Working from home for many meant juggling the roles of being a full-time parent, a full-time worker, a full-time carer, and if that wasn't enough, also managing the expectation of being a full-time teacher too. We know that for carers there was very little time for self-care or quiet time. No carers being allowed to the home meant that this was now a 24/7 role for the family members, and for some, not being able to see those family members at all due to them being shielded in their own accommodation. Our Patient Insight series really looked to capture this, so we could use your voices to show how the coronavirus pandemic has impacted on our community. It was a way to be able to say that this is what matters, this is what's happening, and this is what we need to highlight. But not only this, and this is really important, the Patient Insight series was a tool for reassurance. People still do need to go for routine appointments, and not knowing whether they could do this safely was a real cause for concern. The same people following emergency regimens or needing to access emergency care. What on earth is an unplanned trip to hospital going to look like, and how do I know if I'm going to be safe? The series allowed people to tell their experiences of these situations, giving a first-hand account of all the emotions they felt beforehand, what accessing the care was actually like, and how they came out the other end with everything being okay. Hearing this from someone who has been there is the best way to communicate these sort of reassurances, and it allows others to connect personally with all those emotions that are being felt at the time. So where next with the series? Well, we're branching out. We've already worked on a series for the Breaking Down Barriers project, which aims to promote equality and inclusion. And our interviews as part of this have given a wonderful perspective from both parents and from the medical profession. We're also working on a mental health series, so we want to hear from you if you have a inherited metabolic disorder yourself, or whether you're caring for someone who has. We want to know how this has impacted on your well-being. We want to know how it's affected you personally. And have you sought any sort of help? We want to know who your support network is, who you've reached out to, and how this has been of benefit. We want to try and have more open conversations about this. There should be no stigma, and we hope to make the access to support services more easier through our own pages. We also want to look at topics such as diagnosis, and we know that this varies immensely throughout our community. We know that for some who are prenatally diagnosed, we know that for others, it can be many years waiting for a diagnosis. We also want to hear your experience of other topics, such as education, work, transplants, other treatments, and perhaps not so relevant at the moment, but also travel. We know that this creates a huge barrier for families, especially those travelling on foreign holidays when they don't know where they can access emergency care should they become ill. In the long term, our vision is that we want to be able to share real experiences of as many of the conditions as possible. So if you're interested in simply raising awareness of your inherited metabolic disorder, then do get in touch because we'd love to hear from you. What are the benefits of sharing your story? Well, there are many. It's empowering to share your story. You have a voice to help raise awareness amongst other people and families and amongst the medical profession too. It essentially helps you to become an advocate for your condition and helps give a real-world insight into what living with an inherited metabolic disorder is like day to day. It's able to say what the challenges are and how you can overcome them. It also helps people. Being a newly diagnosed person or a parent or a carer who has just been catapulted into this world of unknowns is hard, and that is a huge understatement. There are many feelings of fear, anxiety, and also feelings of isolation. There's a name of a condition that you can't pronounce, and all the information on Google and in the journals is so overwhelming and immensely complex that you probably need a science degree to understand it. Some may have received a handout with written information and good access to support links, but we know that there are a great many out there who just simply have a name written on a piece of paper and being told that it's a rare disorder. We know that from speaking with these families, that seeing a story or a video from someone who has the same condition has immense benefits. It's just knowing that there are others out there. They're telling you that they felt exactly how you feel now. They're telling you about symptoms and challenges that you are facing right now. But they're also telling you about the future. And in this way, it can help reassure people that they will gain confidence. They will learn to manage the condition, and it will essentially become a part of everyday life. Perspective. I wanted to share a little bit about this. It's one term that's central to our series. We as a patient organisation can provide information, advice and support and answer questions, amongst other things. Your medical consultants that you see can also provide their perspective, and this will be helping to manage the condition, monitoring how you or your family member are doing, and also providing wonderful care when you need it the most. Those living with the condition, however, can also provide their perspective, the day in, the day out, the everyday, an insight into how they overcome things that they might just see as normal. managing medications that might be at home, at work, at school, various places, and what days they go out of date. It could be managing friendships, relationships, improving understanding of the condition in work and education. They might be just sharing diet tips, hints that just make life that little tad easier. And this is why you will always hear us saying that those living with the condition are the experts too, because it's all stuff that they've gained with experience. How can you share your story? Well, you can share your story through writing an article. It'll support you all the way through, and that blank page won't seem too daunting. Another way is through an interview style video. I know, it sounds horrific, right? It's really not, and I promise we're not Paxman. Honestly, we make it as relaxed as possible. And there's plenty of room for mistakes and retakes. Anybody who's worked with me knows that there are many. We can also have a bit of a giggle too. It's a really relaxed process. We've run a few polls, and for the majority we now know that watching videos is the most preferred way of gathering the experiences of others. If you're really camera shy, there are other options that we can explore, such as sharing experiences via podcast only, or using photographs to replace the video. So these could be of your family, your friends, things that are important to you. So if you are interested in sharing your story, then just get in touch. Even if you're feeling unsure, we can give you some information and we can brainstorm some ideas about what's going to work for you. Sharing experiences is really important. This is your story, and we'll do everything we can to make sharing it a positive experience for you. Thank you.
My name is Alex Abisha-Taylor, and my husband is Henri. We have a son called Carlo, who is now 37, who has a urea cycle disorder. And I found Metabolic Support UK originally as the Research Trust for Metabolic Diseases in Children many years ago. That was in 1983, when my son was diagnosed with a urea cycle disorder, but it was not quite clear which one. And quite by chance, I had heard an article on radio the day before all this happened, and I'd never heard of a metabolic disease. It was as if fate had taken a hand in this. And so when we'd recovered, at least from the shock of learning about Carlo's disorder and everything that would follow on, I got in touch with the BBC and said, can you tell me more about this program? And they were very good. They got back to me. In those days, I think we still used to do things in running writing or typing. We didn't use email and stuff. And that's how I found the Research Trust and spoke with Leslie at length, and have stayed involved as much as I can over the years, although we've moved around quite a bit and lived in a couple of different countries. But I've stayed involved as much as I can because I've always valued their support, their insight, and all the things that they're able to do to help families and patients, and also doctors, nurses, and other professionals working with individuals with what are, in many cases, are extremely rare diseases. So I have to say thank you to the Metabolic Support UK and all its predecessors. And I hope that you're all going to be able to get as much out of them as I've been able to over the years, as much as you want and as much as you need. And likewise for those who are experiencing difficulties because of their disorder as well. So when I did the original Patient Insight interview, if you want to call it that, which Helen invited me to do, it was such a good opportunity to share a few experiences about what had happened. Unfortunately, while Carlo is very, how can I say, he's very chatty most of the time, but he's not able to express himself quite as well as some of the other young people I've met subsequently and over the years at conferences. So I always speak on Carlo's behalf, and I'm sure he's very happy about that. I really wanted to be able to share with people how it had helped me to be involved in these activities over the years, and about some of the, I was pleased to be able to recall to myself even some of the people I'd met over the years and some of the links I'd been able to follow, and some of the successes that we've had, not only for us, but for other patients and families over the years. I found the experience wasn't that difficult, actually. I was quite nervous about doing it, not being a bit camera shy, really. So, but actually, once I got going, I found it wasn't too difficult. And let's face it, I suppose most people find it quite easy to talk about themselves. So perhaps that helped as well. And I hoped that it would encourage others at that point to think, oh, well, there's something we could do. It doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be a hugely demanding part of our time. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to do any research for it. You just have to be yourself. And if you can, if the person you're caring for or your loved one who's got the metabolic disease is able to share their experiences, that's even better. So I found it quite a rewarding experience, actually. And I was quite pleased because I did share it with a couple of friends who aren't anything to do with the metabolic community, and they were quite impressed, unless they were just being very kind, I don't know. But anyway, I felt that was something I'd achieved. So it was a good boost for me as well. I can't stress how important it is that people share experiences and information and details. So people don't always share unhappy news. They share happy news as well, and they share struggles, and they share successes, and they share things that happen one day that say, hey, I've suddenly discovered how I can get Theo to take his medicine. I hide it in grenadine syrup and he doesn't seem to notice, and now he takes it. I remember one doctor in the States saying to us, oh, just hide it in some mashed potato. Bad choice. It was a long time before Carlo would touch mashed potato again. So I think we rely a lot more sometimes on the parents and the families' experiences than we do the medical people who may not have actually had to administer the meds themselves to a recalcitrant child. So it's been a lot about sharing tips, sharing ideas, sharing recipes, sharing questions about, does Theo do this? Have you found that your daughter behaves like this? And finding out, what's normal and what's because they've got a metabolic disease, and what can we do about it? And it's amazing how all sorts of little tidbits can become quite important tools, if you like, and aids in our continual management of these disorders. I think that people like to hear about others' experiences, good and bad, particularly good. It's always encouraging to know that it's not all bad. And in these current times where there's a lot of bad stuff going on, it's encouraging to hear how people are managing to overcome their difficulties. I join in sometimes on the webinar we have every fortnight with the Urea Cycle Disorder group, and I'm so impressed by how other families are managing and coping when they've been in a serious lockdown. In our situation, I cannot claim it's been so difficult because our son is now 37. He lives in a very caring residential care setting. They're very open. We're able to have contact with him every day by phone if we want, by Skype, whatever. I can go over, or we can go over and see him, although we can't be in direct contact, but we can sit outside in the garden when it's nice, and we can stand outside the front door and talk to him if it's not such nice weather. But we haven't had the daily struggle of knowing that we can't go out and that we've got to keep this young person occupied, we've got to keep them safe, we've got to find new interesting ways to have meals, to all these sort of things. So I'm just really, really so impressed with how people cope, and I'm so impressed with how people like to share these experiences. And of course, sometimes there are difficulties. We do hear about difficulties people are having, and you know, it's nice to be able to lend a sympathetic ear, so that people don't feel they're on their own struggling with these things. I think we're all struggling with different things at the moment, but of course, when it's your child or a close one, it somehow seems to become much more intense and much more, I don't know, much more emotional. And so I think it's don't ever be afraid when you're talking about things. Don't ever be afraid to show emotion and to share your feelings, because I think it's most important that people understand a lot of the feelings one is having are shared by many. So you're not alone. And I think people find great comfort in each other and encouragement. I've been quite lucky over the years because we've had fantastic support for our son. There have been times when we've had hospitalizations that have not gone well. Over the years, we've realized that there are more and more people who are becoming interested in this inside the medical profession. It's no longer quite such a vague, oh dear, we're not going to bother thinking about that because there's not that many cases sort of thing. I think now I've met some doctors who've been genuinely interested and have taken the time to sit down and talk about it and ask some of the questions that, you know, how have you felt about this and what was it like? And which I think is really great, because they don't get trained that stuff. It's only by hearing about it and by talking to people that they can take it on board if they want to. So I think, yes, go ahead, share your experiences. Don't be afraid to say something awful's happened, and certainly don't be afraid to celebrate when something really good happens. And never be afraid, as I said before, never be afraid to ask for help, advice, and never be afraid to offer your experiences to help someone else. They can decide if they want to listen or not, but I think most people like to listen and like to hear about experiences if it's going to enable them to go on and perhaps deal with things slightly more easily than they felt they could at the very beginning when they received what was potentially a devastating diagnosis. So yes, I think we learn to laugh together and we learn to cry together. And those are possibly the sort of opposite ends of the spectrum that we find in our everyday life with most things, but particularly when we've got children and young people and now older ones with these potentially life-threatening diseases or disorders. So I seem to be able to talk for hours about it, but I would encourage everyone to talk to each other and to not hesitate to talk to anyone who's struggling and who feels they need a bit of a boost. So just get out there and talk about it, and don't be afraid to say what you feel and what you're experiencing at the time. Thank you.
So thank you all so much to this morning's speakers. I have certainly been inspired by all that I've heard, and certainly inspired by what we can achieve as a patient community. I have no doubt that we have a lot more wealth and insights for the rest of the next 2 days, but I certainly take heart from all these wonderful stories that we've heard today about the power of the patient voice and the importance of creating patient leaders. So thank you all. As I wrap up this part of the conference, I want to spend this time to give a special thank you to Joanne, Jessica, Helen, Margaret, and Pushpa for creating this exciting agenda and, you know, already striving to deliver on our new strategy and, importantly, delivering this conference virtually, which took quite a big undertaking. So a huge thank you to Jessica and Helen specifically for that. I also want to take this time to thank our commercial sponsor, for the support which helps us to deliver this conference. And I want to take this opportunity to celebrate our coming together, welcoming new partnerships and collaborations, recharge our personal batteries from this time together, and to listen and learn and be inspired so that we can create a new wave of optimism about the life that we want to create for everyone living with an inherited metabolic disease, today, tomorrow, and every tomorrow thereafter. So thank you all for joining us for this 2 days. I very much look forward to the rest of the conference. Thank you.